On the day of the Marchioness's birthday, Liu Sihan knelt before the main hall and called me sister. Jiang Yue clapped his hands and laughed, while Madam Chen pulled her into her arms. The entire household said she was a good daughter sent by heaven. I glanced up at the 4 characters Anyuan Marquis Manor on the plaque, set down my teacup, and curtsied to Jiang Yue and Madam Chen. My daughter went to stay at the estate. The entire hall fell silent. Madam Chen asked why I was making such a fuss, while Jiang Yue asked if I was throwing a tantrum. I'm not throwing a tantrum. I straightened up. I've had enough. That day, I left with an iron box. Only later did I realize that once I left, I would never turn back. Main text. The hall was festooned with lanterns and decorations. Madam Chen held Liu Sihan's hand and led her toward Jiang Yue. Marquis, just look at how lovely this child is. You can see the shadow of our Jiang family in her eyes and brows. Madam Chen smiled warmly, the corners of her eyes curving like crescents. From now on, she'll be called Sihan. I'll register her under my name, and she and Lingjun will be sisters in every sense. Liu Sihan bowed gracefully, her voice soft and delicate. Sihan pays her respects to the Marquis and older sister. The guests in the hall chimed in one after another, praising the Marchioness for her kindness and saying how blessed the girl was. Jiang Yue sat upright in the seat of honor, accepting the bow with a nod, a satisfied smile playing across his face. I set down my teacup. Mother. I rose and gave Madam Chen a respectful bow. There is something I would like to take this opportunity, while all the guests are present today, to report to father and mother. Madam Chen was helping Liu Sihan adjust the silk flower at her temple. Hearing this, she turned around, her smile undiminished. Good girl, what is it that's so serious? It will be just as well to tell us later. I would like to move to the estate on the outskirts of the city and stay there for a while. The hall fell silent. Jiang Yue's hand, holding the teacup, froze in midair, and the smile on Madam Chen's face stiffened. Liu Sihan slightly raised her eyes, her gaze quickly sweeping over my face before dropping again. Enough nonsense. Jiang Yue set the teacup back on the table. You have a perfectly good marquis residence, so why go to the estate? What would people say if word got out? Please hear me out, father. I stood ramrod straight, my gaze fixed on the brick floor before Jiang Yue, my tone as even as if I were reciting a set of regulations. Lately, I have often felt restless. The physician examined me and said that the complications of the inner residence have unsettled my spirit and that I need to recuperate somewhere peaceful. The estate outside the city is spacious and perfectly suited for recovery. Besides, I paused. Since Sister Sihan has only just arrived, everyone in the household will inevitably have to take extra care. If I remain here, Mother will only be distracted by having to look after us both. It would be better for me to temporarily move out, so that Sister Sihan can settle in without worry. Madam Chen opened and closed her mouth, her gaze shifting back and forth between me and Liu Sihan. Liu Sihan hurriedly said, Sister, your words make Sihan feel terribly uneasy. I've only just arrived, how could I let you move out because of me? You're overthinking it, sister. I gave her a slight nod. This was my own decision and has nothing to do with you. Jiang Yue frowned and studied me for quite some time. He was a man who cared deeply about appearances. In front of all the guests, I had gone so far as to invoke recuperating and making way. If he tried to stop me, it would only make the Marquis' residence seem heartless toward its own daughter and unable to accommodate a distant relative. His heavy gaze pressed down on my shoulders. I lowered my eyes and did not retreat. Are you truly sure? I am. I answered quickly. I'll cover the expenses at the estate from my own account. There's no need to trouble the household funds. At these words, Madam Chen's eyelid twitched. Beside her, Liu Sihan lowered her head at just the right moment and dabbed the corner of her mouth with a handkerchief, as if she were feeling sorry for me, or as if the words household funds had frightened her into silence. Jiang Yue was silent for a moment, then waved her hand. Suit yourself. But it's settled, come back once you've recovered, and don't go running wild outside. Thank you, father. I took 2 steps back, turned around, and walked toward the hall entrance. Behind me, Madam Chen muttered under her breath, everything was perfectly fine, what on earth is this about? Immediately afterward, Liu Sihan gently tried to console her, Madam, please don't worry. Sister must truly be exhausted. She'll be fine after resting for a few days. When I reached the corner of the passageway, Louis came running after me, lowering her voice. Miss, what are you doing? You're the legitimate eldest daughter of the Marquis's residence. You're just going to the estate because you say so. How will the servants speak of you in the future? Speak of me how? I kept walking. I'm merely going there to recuperate. Then you must take something with you, at least? I'll go pack. No need. I pushed open the gate to my own courtyard. It was still exactly as I had left it. The embroidery hoop on the table was only half finished, with a length of apricot-colored thread still threaded through the needle. Bring out the banknotes and boxes from our own account. Leave everything else exactly as it is. Louis stood rooted to the spot. What are you standing there for? I glanced back at her. She shuddered and hurried into the inner room to rummage through the cabinets. I walked to the window and pushed one side open. The begonias beneath the corridor were in full bloom, and the breeze carried petals onto the windowsill. I had lived in this courtyard for 17 years. I knew every brick and tile so well I was sick of them. My past life, no, I shouldn't think about my past life. I was merely tired, utterly exhausted. Behind me came the sounds of rummaging through chests and cabinets, mingled with Louis's lowered muttering. This was given to Miss by her maternal uncle the year she came of age. This is the bracelet the old Madam left for Miss, this box. Are the banknotes and land deeds here? There. It's all in this tin box. I turned around. Louis was clutching a palm-sized tin box, her face flushed bright red and a sheen of sweat beading on her forehead. Behind her trailed a small, half-worn bundle, clearly hastily thrown together. That's all, I said. What? Louis's eyes widened. You're not taking anything else? Your clothes and jewelry, your ornaments and household things. Keep it for the new younger sister. I reached out and took the iron box, weighing it in my hand. It was heavy enough. Let's go. Louis's lips moved slightly, but in the end, she didn't dare ask again. She carried the bundle on her back and followed behind me. We passed through the corridors and circled around the rockery, where we came face to face with 2 older women sweeping the grounds. The moment they saw me, they lowered their heads and moved aside. Only after I had gone some distance did I hear their soft murmurs. Why is the eldest young lady carrying a bundle toward the side gate? Shoo. I heard she's moving to the estate to live. She's giving her courtyard to that newly arrived cousin. The legitimate eldest young lady is giving a courtyard to someone from another family? And the Marquis agreed? What do you know? The young lady from the maternal side has already been acknowledged by Madam as her goddaughter. Louis halted in her steps and turned around, ready to retort. I raised a hand to stop her. Let's go. She gritted her teeth, swallowed her words, and followed sullenly. A small dark green-wheeled carriage was parked beside the side gate. The coachman was a kindly old man. When he saw me, he hurriedly jumped down. Miss this. Are we leaving now? I stepped onto the carriage step and climbed in, then lifted the curtain and glanced back at the plaque above the Marquis's residence, inscribed with the words Anyuan Marquis Residence. The characters were gilded, shining dazzlingly in the sunlight. Beneath the plaque, the 2 vermilion lacquered gates were shut tight, while the lively sounds of the banquet inside drifted faintly through several courtyards, muffled and subdued. Louis climbed into the carriage, her eyes already rimmed with red. "Miss. Don't cry." I lowered the curtain. "Let's go." The coachman flicked his whip, and the wheels rolled over the bluestone pavement with a rumbling clatter. The outline of the Marquis' residence gradually grew smaller behind us, and the bustle and din faded into the distance. I lowered my head and opened the iron box. Inside were 3 land deeds stacked neatly together, along with several large denomination silver notes. Beside them lay a small booklet recording the shop rents and estate yields I had secretly saved over the years. The amount wasn't particularly large, but it was enough for a woman to live a respectable life behind closed doors. Besides, I knew what lay beneath that estate. It was the very place Liu Sihan had been entrusted to manage after earning the Marquis' residence's confidence in my previous life. In just 3 years, she had managed to triple the profits from those once meager fields. This time, Liu Sihan could forget about ever laying a finger on it. The carriage jolted, and Louis, who wasn't seated securely, knocked her head against the carriage wall with a dull thud. Clutching her temple and wincing, she didn't dare cry out, merely looking at me reproachfully. "Idiot." I closed the metal box. "Sit properly. Miss, after we arrive at the estate. We'll talk about it when we get there." When the green oil carriage stopped at the entrance to the manor, it was already dark. I lifted the carriage curtain and saw that the door was ajar, a small, bean-sized glimmer of lamplight showing through the crack, with faint voices drifting out. Louis jumped down from the carriage to push the door open. The moment her hand touched it, the door creaked and swung open on its own. Standing inside was an older woman in an indigo short jacket, holding a bowl of half-cold porridge. When she saw me, she nearly dropped it. "A lady? Granny Jiang." I recognized her. She was the steward woman at the manor. In my previous life, after I married, the manor came under Liu Sihan's management. Granny Jiang remained there for the first 2 years, but I later heard that she had been driven out. I never asked about the exact reason. I only knew that after Liu Sihan took over, every one of the manor's old staff was replaced. Nanny Jiang hurriedly hid the bowl of porridge behind her back. "Why have you come at this hour, miss?" No one sent word ahead, so this old servant could have tidied up the room. An impulse. I stepped over the threshold. Weeds sprouted from the cracks between the bricks in the courtyard, several bundles of firewood were stacked in the corner, and there was a hole in the paper covering the window of the main room on the north side, through which the wind was blowing. "There's no need to tidy up. I'll find a room to rest in for now today. Louis, bring the box inside." Louis squeezed in behind me carrying the iron box, swept her gaze over the courtyard, and wrinkled her nose. I knew what she was thinking. The Marquis' eldest legitimate daughter had set foot on her family's estate for the first time, and there wasn't even a cup of tea to welcome her. Nanny Jiang followed behind me, chattering, "Miss, if only you'd told us you were coming in advance. The estate is crude, and nothing has been prepared. The leak in the main room hasn't been repaired yet, the west wing is piled with grain, and there is a bed in the east wing, though the mattress is rather thin." "The east wing will do." I interrupted her. "If the mattress is too thin, add 2 more layers. Use my own bedding." I. Nanny Jiang answered repeatedly. She turned to leave, then came back. "Are you hungry, miss? This old servant will go cook you a bowl of noodles." "No need. Go lock the door first. Don't open it for anyone who knocks tonight." Nanny Jiang paused, then nodded. "This old servant understands." She carried the lantern toward the gate, and only then could I clearly see a young man standing in the courtyard. He was slender, dressed in a gray cotton chongpao washed pale with wear, his sleeves rolled up to his forearms, and he held a wood-cutting axe in his hand. He was gathering the firewood scattered across the ground into a pile, moving slowly but steadily. When Nanny Zhang turned and saw him, she hurriedly said, "Miss, this is a casual laborer hired by the estate. His surname is Pei. He originally fled here from the north to escape the disaster, but he won't be staying for more than a few days." I glanced at him. Just then, he happened to raise his head. Our eyes met, and he lowered his gaze first, gripping the axe as he retreated into the shadows. I didn't look at him any longer and turned to enter the eastern side room. LV spread a mat on the bed. I opened the iron box and pulled out the small booklet. 3 things were recorded in it: the lease for a shop in the southern part of the city, with an annual rent of 48 taels. The deed to a small courtyard in the north, leased to an elderly couple to rent a tea stall for 2 taels a month. And then there was this estate, the one before me now, 20 mu of poor farmland and a single-entry courtyard. In value, it was nowhere near the rosewood screen in my room at the Marquis' residence, but at least it was mine. As I was turning the pages, Nanny Zhang's voice came from outside. "Miss, the door is locked." "Oh, by the way, Accountant Liu from the estate sent word this afternoon. He said the autumn rent accounts have been settled and asked whether you would inspect them in person or have them sent to the Marquis' residence." I closed the booklet. Accountant Liu was one of Jiang Yue's men. The estate's income had always been recorded in the communal accounts. After Liu Sihan took over in her previous life, the first thing she did was replace Accountant Liu with one of her own trusted aides, claiming that the accounts were unclear. Unclear? That year, the actual autumn rent income had been a full 20% higher than what was reported. "Have him come by tomorrow morning," I said. Liu finished making the bed and turned around. "You want to see Liu the accountant?" She parted her lips, apparently about to say something like, "You've never concerned yourself with these matters before," but in the end she said nothing and lowered her head to tidy the bundle. Not a word was spoken throughout the night. At daybreak the next morning, Liu the accountant arrived. Short and stocky, with a round face, he bowed and smiled ingratiatingly as soon as he entered. "Good day, big miss. I heard that you had moved to the estate, so I specially copied out a set of this year's account books and brought them over." He pulled a thin booklet from inside his robe and held it out to me with both hands. I did not take it. "Besides this one, you have another ledger in your possession, don't you?" I leaned back in my chair, staring at him. The smile on Accountant Liu's face stiffened. "What do you mean, miss? There's only this one ledger in total. Every year it's the same. Have the silver and seeds my mother allocated from the household funds to the estate each year been recorded?" I interrupted him. His Adam's apple bobbed. He let out 2 dry chuckles. "They were allocated, yes, but the estate has considerable expenses, and they're all entered under miscellaneous items." Miscellaneous. I opened the booklet he had handed me and flipped to the last few pages, pointing to a line. "It says here, 30 taels for repairing the canal." Where exactly was the canal repaired? Sweat beaded on Liu the accountant's forehead. This was the canal by the fields to the south. In July, the fields to the south were in drought for half a month in July. There was no water in the canal. I closed the booklet and tossed it back onto the table. "Are you trying to tell me that you spent 30 taels of silver repairing a canal with no water in it?" The room fell silent. Louis stood beside me, hardly daring to breathe, while Nanny Zhang hovered awkwardly in the doorway with a tea bowl in her hands. Liu the accountant wiped away his sweat. "Miss, I was only carrying out orders from above. As for how the Marquis' household's communal funds are used after they're allocated, that has always been handled by the steward beside Madam. I'm asking you." I didn't raise my voice. If anything, it was even softer than before. A gust of wind blew in through the window, and the ledger on the table rustled as 2 pages flipped. Accountant Liu's lips trembled. At last, he could no longer hold himself together and dropped to his knees with a thud. "Please spare me, miss. Those 30 taels. Those 30 taels were used to pay the wages of several tenant farmers below, as well as kickbacks to the purchasing agents in the city. I had no choice. That's how it's always been done in previous years, and the Marquis never asked about it. This year, I am asking. I rose and walked around to stand before him. You'll return the silver, while keeping every penny of the wages you're supposed to receive. As for the padding in the account books, recopy a clean version for me by tonight. Consider the excess the interest for having kept my money all these years. I won't pursue the matter. Accountant Liu froze. Only after a long moment did he react, knocking his head against the floor twice. Thank you, miss. Thank you, miss. I'll take care of it right away. He crawled out on all fours. Only then did Nanny Jiang come in with the tea, her hands still trembling. Miss. This accountant is the Marquis' man. I know. I took the tea and sipped it. Long Jing, it had been steeped a little too long, but it was still drinkable. That's why he tells the truth. If it were someone else, we wouldn't be able to pry a single word out of him. Nanny Jiang closed her mouth, and there was something indefinable in the way she looked at me. Sure enough, Accountant Liu brought over the new ledger that afternoon. This one was much thinner, and the figures were neater too. I looked through it once, then put it away in the iron box. When the sun was slanting westward, Louis went out to pour away the water and returned with a strange look on her face. Miss Zhang Matron says that hired hand surnamed Pei by the east wall filled in the gap in the courtyard wall today, using bricks from our courtyard, no less. So he filled it in, I said. But Zhang Matron says she never told him to touch it. He moved the bricks himself. I paused and set down the booklet in my hand. The eastern window was open, and I could see half a newly built stack of bricks at the foot of the courtyard wall, the mortar still not quite dry. The figure in the gray robe was no longer there. He quietly finished the work and left without a word. It was convenient, at least. Green Calyx was still muttering, who knows what he's really up to. Whatever he's up to doesn't matter. I reopened the booklet. When someone's working, pay more attention to the work under their hands and less to the smile on their face. Got it? Green Calyx paused, let out an "oh," and lowered her head to fidget with her fingers. I continued leafing through the booklet. The autumn rent was considerably higher than last year's. The harvest from this estate had clearly been underreported by 30% by Liu the accountant last year. There was no need to guess whose pocket the rest had lined. From now on, this account would be under my control. When it had grown completely dark, Nanny Jiang came in carrying a bowl of hot noodle soup with a fried egg resting on top. I took it from her. The soup was scalding hot, and the egg had been fried just right, with crisp edges, far better than those exquisite yet long-cold banquet dishes at the Marquis' residence. I lowered my head and ate the noodles while Liu lit an oil lamp beside me. The flame flickered, and the shadow of the hole in the window paper swayed. Early on the third morning, someone from the Marquis' residence arrived. When Louis ran in, I was bent over the newly copied ledger, checking off the figures. She was out of breath and had even forgotten her manners. Miss Nanny Wang from Madam's household is here. She's brought 2 servants carrying a chest and says it's for you. I set down my pen without looking up. Show her in. Nanny Wang entered with a broad smile plastered across her face. Behind her, 2 servants set a camphorwood chest in the middle of the courtyard. The lid wasn't fully closed, revealing half a length of lotus-colored silk. She patted the lid and said, "First, young miss, Madam was worried that your accommodations are too plain, so she specifically ordered this old servant to bring you some clothes and bedding. This entire chest is newly made. Have a look. Thank Mother for me." I interrupted her and walked out from behind the desk, my gaze sweeping over the chest. The silk was fine, and lotus was once my favorite color. But she had forgotten one thing. "Granny Wang, what's underneath the trunk?" Granny Wang's smile faltered for a moment. Underneath? It's all clothes. Clothes wouldn't make the bottom of the trunk sag. I walked over, bent down, and lifted the layer of silk covering the top. Beneath it, a stack of account books and several letters was revealed. Did Mother have you smuggle these in? The smile on Granny Wang's face finally failed to hold. She rubbed her hands together and lowered her voice. Miss, let this old servant tell you the truth. Madam told me to bring you this stack of account books and said you should deal with them discreetly. These are old accounts from the household's common funds, and some of the entries are rather unsightly. Madam said that since you'll be going to the estate, no one outside will be able to trace them to you. It's safer than keeping them in the residence. I didn't touch that stack of account books. I straightened up. What Mother means is that she wants her daughter to shoulder the Marquis household's old accounts and remove anything unclear from the communal funds. Nanny Wang gave an awkward laugh. That's not what she meant. Madam said. Did Mother say where these account books were kept before Liu Sihan arrived? Nanny Wang froze. Well, in a hidden compartment in Madam's storeroom. Now that Liu Sihan has arrived, she's cleared out the storeroom to make space for her new daughter's things, so she thought she'd dump the old account books on me. I dusted off my hands. Nanny Wang, take the chest back. Tell Mother that I know every detail of the land deeds and shop leases belonging to my estate. I won't touch the household's communal accounts. Nanny Wang's face turned alternately pale and livid. Miss, you're putting this old servant in a difficult position. Just repeat my exact words when you return. I turned and walked back to sit behind the desk, reopening my own ledger. If Mother asks, tell her this is what I said. I don't care how the Marquis household spent its money in the past. From now on, no one is to lay a hand on a single coin from my estate. Nanny Wang stood rooted to the spot for quite some time before finally bending down to pick up the stack of account books and waving to the young servants. As they lifted the chest, a corner of the lotus-colored silk slipped down, revealing a jade bangle pressed beneath it. I glanced at it. It was the one Madam Chen had given me on my birthday last year. It had a lovely translucence, but I had never worn it even once. Take the jade bracelet too, I said. Nanny Wang's hand trembled. She scooped up the bracelet and stuffed it into her sleeve without saying another word, then led the young servant out the door. Only after the sound of their footsteps faded beyond the courtyard wall did Louis let out a long breath. Patting her chest, she said, Miss, you're really daring. She's one of Madam's people. Whether I'm daring or not, I'm already at the manor. I closed the account book and picked up my teacup. Can she still drag me back to the residence? Louis thought for a moment, then shook her head. Jiang Yue's letter arrived that afternoon as well. It was very short, 2 sheets of paper. The first contained polite phrases such as I hope you are settling in comfortably at the estate. The handwriting on the second was clearly that of his steward, listing 3 matters point by point. Next year, the estate's agricultural income must remit 30% to the common account. You must return to the residence for the clan ancestor worship ceremony next month. And Lingjun, remember that the estate's fields remain ancestral property of the Marquis' residence. I set the letter on the table. Outside, the sun was blazing, and the newly laid bricks at the foot of the courtyard wall were scorching hot. That short-term laborer surnamed Pei was squatting by the wall, filling the gaps between the bricks with mortar. His back curved into an arc, his movements unhurried. Louis, grind the ink. Louis hurriedly brought over the inkstone. I spread out a sheet of letter paper and dipped my brush in ink. First, I replied to Jiang Yue's opening words, I was settling in comfortably. Then I answered the 3 points written by his steward. I had my own arrangements for dividing the estate's income. As for the ancestor worship ceremony, we would discuss it when the time came. And as for the 4 words ancestral property of the Marquis' residence. I set down my pen, let the letter dry, folded it neatly, and handed it to Louis. Take it back to the manor and give it to the Marquis to open himself. Louis took the letter and was about to leave when I added, "Seal the envelope tightly. I can tell if anyone else has opened it." She nodded and ran out. I turned my attention back to the window. The temporary laborer surnamed Pei had finished filling that section of the wall and stood up to pound his lower back. As he turned, he tilted his head and met my gaze. This time, he did not avoid me but gave a distant nod in greeting before carrying off the bucket of mortar. At least he knew how to observe propriety. Early the next morning, Nanny Zhang hurriedly knocked on the door of the east chamber. "Miss, someone from the Marquis' residence has come again to deliver a message. This time it's the Marquis' personal attendant, and he says you must return to the residence." I was facing the bronze mirror, arranging my hair, the hairpin in my hand never pausing. "Did he say what it's about?" "The attendant is tight-lipped. He only said that the Marquis ordered it and wishes to discuss the matter with you in person." Nanny Zhang lowered her voice. This old servant noticed that the attendant's expression looked rather grim, as though something had happened. I set down the hairpin and rose to my feet. Green Calyx had already hurried ahead to open the door. Standing outside was indeed Chen Fu, the personal attendant who was often at Jiang Yue's side. His face was taut, and the moment he saw me, he bowed and said, "First, miss, the Marquis asks that you return to the residence immediately. Madam fell ill last night and developed a high fever. While delirious, she kept calling your name." "Ill?" "Yes." The physician examined her and said it was an acute heart attack brought on by excessive anger. Chen Fu wiped away his sweat. "The Marquis asks that you return and see her." I was silent for a moment. An acute heart attack brought on by anger? The day before yesterday, Nanny Wang had carried the chest back to report, and Jiang Yue's letter had arrived yesterday. Today, Madam Chen had fallen ill. This anger had flared up with suspiciously perfect timing. "Prepare the carriage," I said to Louis. Chen Fu's face lit up with delight, and he repeatedly assured me that the carriage was waiting right outside the door. I changed into a somewhat worn dress and put on no jewelry at all. I simply wrapped the land deed and banknotes from the iron box in a handkerchief and tucked them into my sleeve. Following behind me, Louis asked, "Miss, why are you bringing those?" I climbed into the carriage and lowered the curtain. "Just in case." The carriage swayed along toward the Marquis' residence. I had traveled this road only 3 days ago, and walking it again now felt almost like looking back. The sugar figurine stall was still there by the roadside. The old man was holding out a newly blown butterfly to a little girl with twin buns, not the same child, and this time he hadn't blown a rabbit. The gilt characters on the Marquis' residence gate were still just as glaring. Chen Fu led me in through the side gate, around the entrance hall, and straight to Madam Chen's main courtyard. Several maids and older servants were standing in the courtyard. When they saw me, they lowered their heads and stepped aside, their eyes darting evasively. Liu Sihan was seated on an embroidered stool beside Madam Chen's bed, holding a bowl of medicine and feeding her spoonful by spoonful. When she saw me enter, she rose, her eyes reddening, and spoke so softly, as if afraid of waking someone, "Sister, you've finally come back. Mother has been in and out of consciousness for most of the night and called for you several times." I looked toward the bed. Madam Chen was leaning against a large bolster, a cloth laid across her forehead. Her complexion was indeed poor, but her eyes were clear and fixed on me. She looked nothing like someone babbling incoherently. "Mother." I stood beside the bed without sitting down. Madam Chen weakly raised her hand and patted the edge of the bed. "Lingjin. Mother heard that you reprimanded the steward at the estate and even drove your nanny Wang out. Mother is terribly worried. Tell me, as an unmarried young lady, how can you be so high profile out there? What will become of your reputation?" As she spoke, her voice took on a sobbing note. Liu Sihan gently stroked her back beside her and coaxed softly, "Madam, don't worry. Elder sister has her own ideas." "What ideas?" Madam Chen suddenly raised her voice, and most of that weakness vanished at once. You are the legitimate eldest daughter of the Marquis' household, not some wild girl from the countryside. Your father will handle those matters at the estate. Why are you involving yourself? Come back and live here at once. The room fell silent for a moment. Liu Sihan lowered her eyes and set the bowl of medicine on the small table beside the bed. Sunlight slanted in through the window, falling directly on Madam Chen's face and illuminating the fine wrinkle beside her cheek with perfect clarity. I looked into her eyes, took the handkerchief from my sleeve, and unfolded it, revealing the contract inside. Mother. I gently placed the land deed and lease agreement on the edge of the bed. You had me come back. Was it because you wanted me to hand these over to the family estate as well? Madam Chen's gaze fell on the contract papers, and her throat bobbed. Liu Sihan reached for the medicine bowl at just the right moment. Her sleeve slipped down, revealing a section of her pale, smooth wrist, adorned with a vivid green jade bangle of exceptional translucence. I recognized it. It was the one Madam Chen gave me for my birthday last year. I did not move. I merely watched as Madam Chen's hand slowly reached over. Just as her fingertips touched the corner of the land deed, I pulled the document back. You're ill, so focus on recuperating first. I rewrapped the handkerchief and tucked it back into my sleeve. As for the estate, I'll return in a few days. Madam Chen froze for a moment, apparently unable to tell whether my words, "I'll return in a few days," meant that I had agreed to come back or not. She opened her mouth, but Liu Sihan had already brought the medicine bowl to her lips again and coaxed her gently, "Madam, have your medicine first. Your health is what matters." The medicine bowl blocked Mrs. Chen's view. I stepped back twice, turned around, and walked out. When I reached the doorway, Liu Sihan chased after me and called from beneath the veranda, "Sister." I stopped but did not turn around. Don't blame Madam, her voice drifted from behind me, soft and gentle. She's only worried about you. Being out there on your own can never be as safe as staying at home. If you're having any difficulties, tell me, and I'll plead with Madam on your behalf. I turned my head slightly and caught, from the corner of my eye, the jade green bangle on her wrist gleaming with a dim light in the sunlight. No need. I withdrew my gaze and continued walking. Keep the bangle, the color suits you. There was a brief silence behind me. I stepped through the moon gate in the passageway, and Louis hurried to catch up, placing the iron box back in my hands and asking in a hushed voice, "Miss, are we returning to the estate, or?" Returning to the estate. What about Madam? I said I'd return in a few days. I never said I wouldn't leave today. I climbed into the carriage and placed the iron box on my lap. Go. Before the carriage curtain was lowered, I took one last look at the plaque bearing the Marquis' residence's name. By the time we returned to the estate, dusk was beginning to fall. Louis jumped down from the carriage to open the gate, then suddenly exclaimed, "Huh?" I poked my head out and saw that the courtyard gate was open. Granny Jiang stood behind the threshold with a strange expression, clutching half a broom in her hand. The moment she saw me return, she hurried over to greet me. "Miss, you're finally back." This afternoon, as soon as you left, a group of people came by, claiming to be stewards from the Marquis' residence. They brought keys and wanted to open the storeroom. The storeroom? I got down from the carriage. Which key? The one that used to be kept by Liu, the accountant. Those people said Madam had ordered them to transfer some of the estate's stored grain back to the residence for use, and told this old servant to open the door. Granny Jiang stamped her feet anxiously. I told them the key was with you, miss, but they wouldn't listen and insisted on breaking the lock. Luckily, that odd job worker surnamed Pei blocked the storeroom door and said they could break the lock, but only after he reported it to the authorities and got the matter clarified. Only then did those people back down. They cursed and grumbled as they left. I halted and glanced toward the foot of the eastern wall. A shadow in a gray cloth robe leaned against it. The odd job worker surnamed Pei was squatting on the ground, using a blade of grass to pick the mud from between his shoe seams. When he saw me looking over, he stood up and dusted off his hands, then turned to chop firewood as if nothing had happened. Has anything in the storeroom been moved? Not a thing. The lock's still secure. Granny Zhang patted her chest. That Pei boy looks so thin and frail, but the way he planted himself at the door was downright intimidating. I said no more and walked over to the storeroom door to inspect the lock. It was exactly as Granny Zhang had said, untouched. The lock was made of brass and had been hanging there for 3 years. Oiled paper had been stuffed into the keyhole to prevent rust, and it was tucked in exactly the same way as when I left. Bolt the courtyard gate from the inside tonight, I told Granny Zhang. Starting tomorrow morning, seal up every gap in the courtyard wall. Don't leave a single opening. Nanny Zhang hurriedly nodded and went to attend to it. I turned and headed back to the east wing. As I passed the woodpile, the temporary laborer surnamed Pei was neatly stacking the split firewood into a pile. He worked swiftly and efficiently. Each piece of firewood was almost identical in length and thickness, and the stack was perfectly orderly. What's your name? I asked. His hands did not stop moving, nor did he look up. Pei Yan. Yen? Which yen? Yen of water flowing into the sea. I glanced at him. His tone was flat, as if he were reciting a list of dishes. Water flowing into the sea did not sound like a name a day laborer would have chosen. But I did not ask further. The world was unsettled, and there was indeed a war in the north. It was not uncommon for refugees to flood into the capital, nor was it particularly rare for a scholar fallen on hard times to become a day laborer. Thank you for blocking the door this afternoon, I said. What would you like as a reward? Pei Yan stacked the last piece of firewood, then straightened and finally looked me in the eye. His eyes were very dark, with a glimmer of light deep in his pupils, like a single star reflected in a deep well. No need for a gratuity, he said. I can patch the gap in the courtyard wall. Part of the irrigation ditch along the eastern field ridge is blocked. Give me a shovel, and I can clear it in 2 days. I fell silent for a moment. First, this man refused silver. Second, he wanted no reward. The moment he opened his mouth, he was talking about getting to work. Compared with the people from the Marquis' residence, who started calculating what they could take from the moment they entered the door, his attitude left me at a loss for words. What about after the ditch is cleared? I asked. He thought for a moment. That patch of land on the southern slope is shaded, so the wheat yield is only average. If you trust me, miss, plant beans there instead. Next year, the harvest could increase by 20%. Louis tugged at my sleeve beside me and lowered her voice. Miss, he's just a day laborer from outside. Don't believe his nonsense. I ignored Louis and looked at Pei Yan. You know how to farm? I farmed for several years before I fled the disaster. The south slope gets little sunlight, so beans are indeed more suitable than wheat. Tomorrow, go dig an irrigation ditch along the eastern field ridge. The shovel is in the woodshed. I turned and went back into the house, but stopped after 2 steps. Tell Nanny Zhang to clean up the empty room in the west wing for you. The manor will provide your food and lodging. Your wages remain the same. There was no sound behind me. I turned around. Pei Yan was still standing beside the pile of firewood, eyes lowered, his expression impossible to make out. After a few moments, he said quietly, "Thank you, miss." No need to thank me. I pushed open the door to the eastern side room. Someone who works should have a place to stay. Louis followed me in. The moment the door closed, she exploded, "Miss. You're really letting a man of unknown origin stay at the estate? If word gets out, Word gets out about what? I sat down and poured myself some tea. He stopped the Marquis steward and protected my storehouse. What's wrong with giving him a room to stay in? But if he really had any malicious intentions, I took a sip of tea. It was warm, just right. He shouldn't have stopped those people this afternoon. He could have let them pick the lock and carry off the grain. If I came back and investigated, he'd be the first person I suspected. By stopping them at the door, he's cleared himself completely. Think about it. Louise stood there with her mouth open for a long while. Her expression changed. You mean he stopped them at the door not to help us, but to clear himself of suspicion? I didn't say that. I set down the teacup. I'm only saying that someone who can chop firewood into pieces of exactly equal length thinks 3 steps ahead before doing anything. If you drive someone like that away, he could turn around and help someone else. Better to keep him where we can keep an eye on him. LVE fell silent and lowered her head to make the bed. I reopened the iron box and counted the land deeds and leases again, making sure nothing was missing. Today, Madam Chen wanted to take these. Tomorrow, Liu Sihan might come to help relieve Madam's worries. Before they could start scheming, I had to establish rules for everything on the estate, rules that no one could interfere with. I woke before dawn the next day. When I stepped outside, Pei Yan was already carrying a shovel toward the eastern field ridge, his figure shrinking into a gray speck in the dim morning mist. Nanny Zhang was tending the fire in the kitchen. Seeing me up, she brought over a bowl of hot porridge and said in a lowered voice, "Miss, the Marquis' residence sent another message last night. Madam is feeling somewhat better and said you should return today if you have time." I'm not going back. I took the bowl of porridge. Just tell them the beans in the fields have been harvested and urgently need to be spread out to dry. The corner of Nanny Zhang's mouth twitched. She did not dare ask further and returned to the kitchen to continue her work. On the 3rd day, the Marquis' residence did not send another message. Green Calyx, however, returned from shopping outside, barely able to contain her smile. "Miss, guess who I ran into on the street today?" "Who?" "Accountant Liu." She set down the basket of vegetables and leaned close to my ear. He was boasting to someone that working for you now feels more secure than managing the accounts at the Marquis' residence ever did. He also said that you really did use those 30 taels of silver meant for canal repairs to buy bean seeds and fertilizer, and that the entire plot on the southern slope has been planted. I put down my needlework and said nothing. Of course, 30 taels of silver was more than enough to buy bean seeds. I had Nanny Zhang use the remainder to purchase 2 half-grown piglets, which we raised in the backyard. With grain, vegetables, and meat on the estate, even if the Marquis' residence did not send anyone with supplies for a year or 2, no one would starve. He also said, Liu clasped her hands over her mouth, barely suppressing a laugh, that he spread the word about you auditing the accounts. Now that tenant at the shop in the southern part of the city heard about it and took the initiative to send over an extra 2 taels of silver in rent, saying it was a token of respect for the eldest young lady. Return it. I looked up at her. The rent is whatever was stipulated in the lease, no more. Next time the tenant brings anything over, tell him that running the shop properly is more important than anything else. I'm not short of those 2 taels of silver. Liu remained stunned for a moment before uttering an acknowledgement. Then she added, "Anne. The beans on Pei Yan slope have been planted. They say the seedlings should emerge in about 10 days. I hummed an acknowledgement and did not look up again. The daylight outside was bright, and the gap in the courtyard wall had already been firmly sealed with new bricks. The pile of firewood in the corner had been chopped into neat stacks. Nanny Zhang hummed a little tune as she cooked in the kitchen, while the 2 piglets in the back courtyard snorted and rooted around in their feed trough. In all the 17 years I lived at the Marquis' residence, there had never been this kind of commotion in the courtyard. When Liu Sihan came that day, her footsteps were so light that I was squatting in the back courtyard watching the piglets eat. When I looked up, she was already standing outside the wooden gate. Dressed in lotus-pink robes and wearing a jade-green bracelet around her wrist, she looked like an orchid cut from an exquisite painting, utterly out of place amid the rough, earthy stench of the pigsty. "Sister." She smiled through the wooden gate, her voice so soft it seemed it could drip with sweetness. "Mother asked me to come see you, saying she was worried you wouldn't be used to living here alone." I didn't get up, continuing to watch the piglets root around in the trough. "I'm used to it." Liu Sihan pushed at the rough wooden gate, but it didn't budge. The latch was fastened from the inside. The hint of a smile on her face stiffened slightly, then blossomed again. "Sister, aren't you going to invite me in to sit for a while?" "The courtyard is too small for that." I stood up and brushed the chaff from my hands. "Whatever Mother wants to say, just say it directly." Liu Sihan lowered her eyes. When she raised them again, they were faintly reddened. "Sister, I know you're upset. Mother gave the jade bracelet to me. When you saw it, you must have felt uncomfortable. But Mother forced the bracelet on me. I refused several times." "I'm not upset." I interrupted her. "The bracelet suits you." "I already said that." She paused, as though she hadn't expected me to answer so crisply. Wind blew in through the wooden gate, lifting the loose strands of hair at her temples. She raised a hand and tucked them behind her ear, the jade-green bracelet on her fair wrist swaying gently. "Then why did you insist on moving out, sis?" I looked at her. Liu Sihan's gaze was soft, like silk steeped in warm water, winding around me little by little. But I neither looked away nor let her lead me along. "Because I wanted some peace and quiet," I said. She waited a little longer, and when she saw that I had nothing more to say, the smile at the corners of her mouth finally faded somewhat. She took a step back, gathered her shawl around herself, and her voice remained as gentle and soft as ever. "Then I'll go back and tell Mother that you're doing well, sister. I'll come visit you often from now on." "No need." I turned and walked toward the kitchen. "If you come, I'll have to boil water and make tea. The tea here isn't very good, you're not used to it." There was a moment of silence behind me. Then the faint sound of footsteps began, moving farther and farther away, growing lighter and lighter until the wind scattered them at the end of the field path. Liv poked her head out of the kitchen and glanced toward the wood gate. "She's gone?" "I'm leaving." "Girl, you really sent her away just like that?" "I didn't send her away." I walked into the kitchen, where Nanny Zhang was adding firewood to the stove. The water in the pot was bubbling away. She wanted to leave of her own accord. The day the bean sprouts emerged, Pei Yan came to see me. He stood outside the east wing, speaking through the half-closed door. "Girl, the bean sprouts on the southern slope have come up, and they're growing well." He paused, then added, "The irrigation channel is open too." I was revising the figures in a newly drafted set of regulations for the estate when I heard him. I set down my pen. "Come in." He pushed the door open and stepped inside, stopping just beyond the threshold, not too close, not too far, mud clinging to the soles of his shoes. His gaze first swept over the furnishings in the room, which, in truth, amounted to little more than a table and a bed. Iron boxes and several booklets were piled in the corner, and half a bowl of cold tea sat on the table. He withdrew his gaze, pulled a sheet of paper from inside his robe, and held it out. "I've noted down, roughly, the soil quality and hours of sunlight for the fields on the southern slope. If you're thinking of planting something else, it'll come in handy when you rotate the crops." I took it and glanced over it. The paper was coarse, but the handwriting was neat and elegant. It listed the orientation, soil color, and moisture conditions of the 20 mu of land on the southern slope, along with a small note indicating what had been planted in each plot in previous years. The entire sheet was filled, without a single wasted character. "Have you studied?" I asked. He was silent for a breath, then replied, "For a few years." "What did you study?" "Miscellaneous books." His tone was indifferent. I skimmed the 4 books but never mastered the 5 classics. I didn't press him further. Quite a few educated people had fled here from the north, and it wasn't unheard of for learned men to end up as day laborers. He left the sheet of paper on my desk and turned to go, but stopped when he reached the door. "Miss," he said with his back to me, his voice lowered to a whisper, "there have been people lurking around nearby lately. 2 men wearing blue-gray short jackets. They don't look like local farmers." The pen in my hand paused. "When?" "The night before last," he said. "They squatted on the field ridge south of the estate for half the night. I didn't alert them, I watched from a distance. They left at dawn." I set down my pen. The field ridge to the south, that was the direction leading to the back courtyard's firewood gate. When Liu Sihan came that day, she had also taken the dirt path to the south. "Did you get a clear look at their faces?" "It was dark. I couldn't see their faces clearly." Pei Yan turned his head, half his face falling into the shadow of the doorframe. "But one of them had a slight limp in his right leg and dragged it as he walked." I nodded without saying anything. He did not stay any longer either, stepping over the threshold and pulling the door shut behind him. His footsteps went along the corridor toward the woodshed, unhurried. Louis carried in a bowl of noodles from outside, brushing past him just as he was leaving. She glanced back several times, then came in, set the noodles on the table, and lowered her voice. "Miss, what did he come to deliver this time?" I pointed to the sheet of paper on the table. Louis leaned over and studied it for a long while, but couldn't understand a single character. "What does it say?" "The farming accounts for the southern slope." I folded the paper and put it away in an iron box. "They're much more detailed than the ones kept by Accountant Liu." "He really knows how to farm?" Louis muttered, pushing the bowl of noodles toward me. "Eat your noodles first, miss, or they'll get cold and clump together." I lifted the bowl and picked up a mouthful of noodles with my chopsticks, just about to eat, when Nanny Zhang's voice came from outside. "Miss, the Marquis is here." The rag in Louis's hand fell to the floor. I put down my chopsticks and stood up. "Where is he?" "He's already entered the courtyard." Nanny Zhang's voice trembled. "The Marquis came alone. He didn't bring anyone else." Before she could finish, Jiang Yue was already standing at the entrance to the east side room. He wasn't wearing his official robes, but a dark indigo brocade robe, a jade belt fastened around his waist. He held a letter in his hand, and it was impossible to tell whether he was pleased or displeased. He merely swept me a heavy glance. "Lingjin, come out. I need to talk to you." I gestured for Louis to step aside, lifted my skirt, and stepped over the threshold. Jiang Yue walked 2 steps beneath the corridor and stood in the sunlight, shaking open the letter. At this morning's court session, someone submitted a memorial accusing me, the Marquis of Anyuan, of misappropriating public funds. His voice was very calm, but I could hear what lay beneath it. Attached to the memorial was a statement of accounts detailing the income and expenditures of the Marquis's household over the past 3 years. These accounts don't match the records kept by the Ministry of Revenue. There's a discrepancy of about 600 taels. He paused and turned the letter over. What's interesting is that the entries in the statement attached to this memorial match, word for word, the old account book kept in my residence's storeroom. The sun shone beneath the veranda, and I narrowed my eyes. "What does father mean?" "What I mean is," Jiang Yue folded the letter and tucked it back into his sleeve, "that old ledger. A few days ago, your mother had Nanny Wang deliver it to you, but you refused to accept it." "I refused it," I said. "You did well not to take it." Jiang Yue suddenly smiled. The smile was faint, vanishing as soon as the corner of his mouth lifted. "If you had taken it, once this memorial was submitted today, the charge of the eldest legitimate daughter of the Marquis of Anyuan's residence privately keeping the public accounts would have been impossible to shake." I looked at him. Jiang Yue was looking at me too, and in his gaze, usually marked by perfunctory indifference, there was suddenly something more. It was as though he had recognized that the person standing before him was his daughter, not a tool to be used for a marriage alliance. Who submitted the memorial? I asked. An assistant director in the Ministry of War. Jiang Yue clasped his hands behind his back. He spent 3 days investigating, but couldn't find out who had delivered the accounts to him. The copy was made painstakingly neatly, and even the seal had been traced in wax. There's no way to trace it back to its source. I fell silent. The neatly itemized accounts, the wax-impressed seal. Whoever could reproduce the old public accounts of the Marquis' residence without missing a single character and deliver them to the Ministry of War while evading Jiang Yue's eyes was no outsider. Father. I looked up at him. Besides you and Mother, who else has handled that old ledger? Jiang Yue's brows drew together. Some time ago, your mother was busy tidying the storeroom. She took out the things in the secret compartment and sorted through them. She said that day, he suddenly stopped, a knot forming between his brows. What happened that day? Your distant cousin, Liu Sihan, was also in the storeroom that day. Jiang Yue's voice dropped. Your mother said she helped sort things out for half the day. The wind blew over from the southern slope, carrying the scent of freshly turned earth. I stood motionless beneath the corridor, and so did Jiang Yue. After a long while, he asked, Lingshan, when you insisted on moving out back then, had you already sensed that something was wrong? I did not answer the question. Some things cannot be said. Once spoken, they become another story. Father, I looked at him. Does the residence still have a copy of that old ledger? Jiang Yue was silent for a moment, then shook his head. That was the original ledger. The accountant who handled it back then is already dead. Your mother had originally wanted you to take it away and hide it, but she didn't expect you not to collect it. So that means, I slowly pieced it together, after Liu Sihan went through that ledger, there were no other backup records left in the residence. Jiang Yue's expression shifted slightly. His hand, held behind his back, clenched briefly before relaxing. I suddenly felt that there were a few more white hairs at his temples than there had been a few days ago. Father, I stepped half a pace to the side, clearing the entrance to the east wing. Would you like to come in and sit for a while? There isn't any good tea at the estate, but there is a pot of drinkable water. Jiang Yue glanced at me. There was a complicated look in his eyes, as though he were seriously taking a look at his daughter for the first time. He said nothing, but lifted his foot over the threshold and entered the room. Greenie hurriedly poured another bowl of water and brought it over. He took it but did not drink, lowering his head to look at the tea leaves floating and sinking in the bowl. Lingshan. From now on you may make your own decisions about matters concerning the estate, he said, without looking at me, his eyes fixed on the water in the bowl. As for the household accounts, I'll have the accountant prepare a new statement of income and expenditure. That ledger of yours. My ledger contains only my own land deeds and lease agreements. It has nothing to do with the Marquis' household accounts, I said. If Father wishes to inspect it, you may come at any time. Jiang Yue placed the bowl on the table and stood up. When he reached the door, he paused, turned his head slightly, and said softly, As for Liu Sihan, I'll have someone send her back to her place of origin. No need, I said. Jiang Yue turned back to look at me. She hasn't played all her cards yet. Sending her back would only leave us with a hidden threat. It's better to keep her where we can see her, that way, we'll know what she plans to do next. Jiang Yue looked at me and suddenly smiled. This time, the smile lasted a little longer than before. The corners of his mouth curved halfway up, then pressed back down, as if he wanted to say something but ultimately couldn't bring himself to. He patted the folded document tucked into his sleeve, strode out of the courtyard, and climbed into the carriage waiting outside. Only after the sound of the carriage had faded did Louis poke her head out from the kitchen, her face full of bewilderment. "Miss, the Marquis. The Marquis has left just like that?" "I'm leaving." I returned to the table. The noodles had gone soggy, but I picked up my chopsticks and continued eating. Outside the window, on the southern slope, the newly sprouted pea shoots swayed their tender green tips in the wind, row upon neat row. Pei Yan carried over a stack of freshly chopped firewood from the woodshed and piled it against the base of the eastern wall. He bent over to stack the wood, then straightened after placing the last piece and glanced toward the southern slope. The wind swept over the slope, making the hem of his gray robe flap loudly. I lowered my head and ate the noodles, bite by bite, unhurriedly. Pei Yan seemed to notice something and turned his head, glancing at my window from across half the courtyard. I didn't look up, and he didn't say a word. Carrying the empty basket, he turned and left. When half a mouthful of soup remained at the bottom of the bowl, Louis asked timidly from the doorway, "Miss, from now on, are we really going to cut ourselves off completely from the Marquis' residence?" I set down the bowl and wiped the corner of my mouth. "Not completely." Louis froze. "There's still one thing missing." I folded the handkerchief and placed it back on the table. People must know beyond any doubt that, from this day forward, every grain of rice I, Jiang Lingjun, eat and every penny I spend has absolutely nothing to do with the Anyuan Marquis' residence. Then, what should we do? I rose and walked to the window. The courtyard wall had already been sealed up tight. The bean sprouts on the southern slope rustled in the wind, while Pei Yan carried a shovel toward the fields, his figure casting a long, slender shadow beneath the noonday sun. "Just wait," I said, "someone will come and finish this for me." The wind blew in from the southern slope. I closed the window and turned around to clear away the empty bowls that had congealed on the table. The story has come to an end. Thank you all for your companionship. See you in the next one.